Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Arts and Environmental Justice Symposium hosted by Mural Arts Philadelphia and the Mural Arts Institute. We're so grateful that you're joining us for this series of events. Many of you may have joined us yesterday for the opening remarks and keynotes, and if so, we're grateful that you're here as well. And if this is the first event of the series that you're attending, we're so happy that you're here. Wanted to start with an access statement before we begin with our proceedings today. My name is Sipp. I'm a brown woman with short brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a gray shirt and sitting in front of a gray wall with artwork that's important to me. I also want to start in acknowledging that the land on which we live and labor were stolen from the Lenni Lenape peoples and their descendants who survived and remained in the homeland, in addition to those in the diaspora who were forcefully removed as far as Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Canada, and are still marginalized even in the city of brotherly love. As you know, registration to the symposium was free, but I hope that you find the links to tribal governments and Indigenous organizations on Lenape-Hakanik land, Philadelphia, in the chat, and consider donating and learning more in the spirit of reparations and reciprocity. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that Councilmember Kendra Brooks was going to be part of today's panel and moderate today's discussion. I want to honor and reflect the fact that she has some personal matters to attend to right now, and on behalf of the panel, we send her love and solidarity as she addresses these matters. I'm going to be taking over her moderation today, and I feel really honored to be in conversation with our panelists today. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. I do want to share a little bit about how Councilmember Kendra Brooks's platform and the labor that she does in the city is deeply intertwined with the topic of today's panel, Land and Liberation, Ecological Practice and Creative Freedom. Here in Philly, her city council office has been laying the groundwork for a Green New Deal and thinking a lot about food insecurity, housing as a human right, and the climate crisis and land access. They've been in conversation with grassroots organizers throughout the city and across the region to grow our strategy from the ground up and ensure that people leading our movements for land justice are those most impacted by systems of oppression. And we thank her for her labor. Today's event, we will be hearing from 3 different speakers and the work that they do in their different regions, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Mississippi. I will be reading short introductions, and then really I'll just let the speakers introduce themselves a little bit more thoroughly and dig into it from there. And then we'll have some conversation. And at the end, there will be an opportunity for Q&A as well. So I want to introduce Dr. Christina Castro, who was born in Southern California and currently resides in Oga Po'ogeh, Santa Fe, New Mexico, within her traditional homelands. She's a mother of 1, writer, scholar, and educator, community organizer, multidimensional artist, public speaker, and more. In 2017, Dr. Castro co-founded 3 Sisters Collective, an Indigenous women-centered grassroots org devoted to art, activism, education, and community building. Dr. Castro received her doctorate from Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation and Justice Studies in 2018, and is an independent consultant with Castro Consulting, LLC. I want to also be transparent in sharing that at the Mural Arts Institute, a large body of my professional work is in community and collaboration with Dr. Castro and 3 Sisters Collective, and we are so privileged to have that relationship. Thank you. Right on. Carlton Turner is the lead artist and director of Sipp Culture. He is an artist, agriculturalist, arts advocate, policy shaper, lecturer, consultant, and facilitator. Carlton is the founder of the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, Sipp Culture, which uses arts and agriculture to support rural community, cultural, and economic development in his hometown of Utica, Mississippi, where he lives with his wife, Brandy, and 3 children. Thank you for joining us today, Carlton.
Pleasure to be here.
And last but certainly not least, Israel Francisco Haros Lopez was born in East LA to immigrant parents of Mexican descent. He brings firsthand knowledge of the realities of migration, U.S. border policies, and life as a Mexican American to his work with families and youth as a mentor, educator, arts instructor, ally, workshop facilitator, and activist. He's the recipient of the Kindle Project's Maker's Muse Award. He studied at UC Berkeley and received a degree in English Lit and Chicano Studies, followed by an MFA in creative writing from California College of the Arts. At formal and informal visual art spaces, Israel creates and collaborates in many interdisciplinary ways, including poetry, performance, music, visual art, and video making, and curriculum creation. His work addresses a multitude of historical and spiritual layered realities of border politics, identity politics, and the reinterpretation of histories. He was formerly the program coordinator at Adelante and is one of the founders and forces of energy at Alas de Agua Art Collective and the New Mexico Murals Project. Last year, he began working with YouthWorks, Reunity Resources, the Mother Nature Center, to grow food for the community on county-owned land in San Isidro Crossing, Santa Fe. And we're so grateful to be working with Alas de Agua in Israel as well through the Arts and Environmental Justice Initiative. Thank you all for being here today. Right on. My friends, I'm going to stop reading off of this, and I'm really just going to pass the mic over to you. Christina, I'd love to learn more about Three Sisters and what brought you to this work. If you would like to continue to introduce yourself, we'll each go ahead and do that for a few minutes before engaging in conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ta'a. Thanks for the introduction. Really grateful to be here. As mentioned, I am one of the co-founders of Three Sisters Collective here in Oga Po'ogeh, Santa Fe, New Mexico, unceded Tewa territory. As a resident of Santa Fe and an Indigenous person, it's a really interesting place because this is a place where our culture is commodified. Back in the days when folks like Georgia O'Keeffe and her cronies came out to this area, they basically laid the template for the commodification of Indigenous arts. So here in Santa Fe, the whole economy is based off of us, basically, our aesthetics, our food, our culture, our dances, our mountains, our sacred lands. So that's why people come here. They come here for a cultural experience. Unfortunately, for many, many years, the city has failed to honor us. And that's because of a history of first Spanish colonialism and leadership, and then American colonialism that came in the late 1800s. The Spanish came in the late 1600s. And then the American colonialism came in the late 1800s. And with that came a huge change in our lifestyles. For Pueblo people, as most Indigenous people, we are the people of the corn, as beautifully demonstrated on the shirt I'm wearing. So our lifestyle and practices here in New Mexico, specifically northern New Mexico, were rooted in our land and our land-based agrarian systems. That's basically our culture. Our religion is rooted in corn, basically, and our lifeways. So with these changes imposed by colonialism, our people have lost a lot of our farming traditions. Still in our tribal communities and in our pueblos, you see a lot of folks still farming, but that became a lost practice with the cash economy and the influx of settler colonialists. So now I think the trend in most Indigenous communities too, we're going through almost like I would say a cultural renaissance. And part of that is reclaiming our languages, our cultures, our practices, our dances, our ceremonies, and our livelihoods, our pre-colonial livelihoods and health ways, because there's a lot of disparities in our health too in the Indigenous community. And if you look at the toll that COVID has taken on our communities, that's indicative of the ongoing state of our health on tribal nations. So really our culture, the reclamation and the saving, I don't want to say saving, but the reclamation of our culture is really rooted in our health too. So I think the more we turn to our land-based practices and start to remember our original instructions, I think that's the key to the future. And so our work as Three Sisters is really rooted in arts, activism, education, community building. And our most recent development is a partnership with Alas de Agua, Israel's organization, and some community orgs who are already doing farming, but not really, farming, yes, but I think we're bringing in that indigenous lens and creating new farming spaces as a means of connecting community members. A lot has happened in our community over the last 6 months with all the changes you've been seeing sweeping the nation, social justice movements. We have them too, even here in our small microcosm of northern New Mexico. Some monuments came down honoring genocide, and that's created a lot of it was almost like opening a Pandora's box of a lot of unsettledness in our communities. And we see the way to healing for at least our particular demographic is rooted in farming practices. So our new project that was really set in place by Alas de Agua in Israel is farming. And I think that's the real revolution going into the future. I think really the most radical thing that we can do right now as indigenous people is reclaim our land-based practices as Pueblo people here in New Mexico, as indigenous people across the Americas. And I think that's where all the seeds are going to be planted of hope for the future. Because if we don't have our health, we can't do all the other work on top of it. So a lot of our ceremonies are very rigorous. A lot of our religious practices are very rigorous. And we have to be physically and emotionally fortified to reclaim them and to continue them into the future. And I could go on and on, but I want to pass it over to Israel because I think it's a good segue into your introduction. I know I said a lot in about 5 minutes, so I'm going to pass it over. Thank you. And yes, I am Jemez Pueblo and Taos Pueblo and Chicana. I get so excited sometimes I forget to like do all the things that I am.
Hello, my name is Israel. Just to give a little blurb about where I am. I'm standing in Santa Fe, Oga Po'ogeh territory. I'm a not so short brown man with long curly hair. I'm wearing a green shirt, and behind me is a bunch of my arte. There's a bunch of really huge art pieces that illustrate some of my ancestors. Okay, I would say thank you for the opportunity to be here, and just feeling really grateful, Seppadia, when you just announced all of us. It just feels like a super big blessing to be in this room and to feel really fortunate, because a year ago, when the pandemic hit, we had just opened up this art space after many years of doing a lot of murals in the community and then building with other different organizations, couch surfing. I'd like to say that we were couch surfing. We didn't have any kind of access to a building other than whoever let us borrow their building until January of last year. And then we opened our doors, and 2 months later, we had to close our doors, which was super heartbreaking because I had just quit my job and try to do this whole art director stuff full time. But how our ancestors and the blessings come if we stay open. I've been fortunate enough to already be on my own land, 7 acres. And I just went back home and prayed and tried to figure out what and how I was going to help in the pandemic. And I approached Malin from YouthWorks, and she got a hold of the county, and because I said we need to get access to land now, and we need to help get resources to our people, help them get food, but also for the mental health and well-being of our people, that we need to be on the land in the middle of a pandemic and feel like we're actually doing something for the longer term. It had always been a vision for us to have a community center and an urban farm. And all of a sudden, I found myself being propelled into the realm of the farm and agricultural world. It was kind of like, okay, your art muscle is really strong. You've already, you're pulling in all these different resources. It's time to really flex that farming muscle, because at that point in time, I only had a garden in my own backyard and had done a little bit of farming and had a relationship to the corn. My ancestral people, the corn people, I'd say it that way, not that it's an object, but a spirit, and a beautiful spirit that has been in my generations for generations back, as being a Mexicano, Chicano, Raramuri, and Huichol in the background. So I found myself in that space. And then I had to recall that around February, I had actually made that prayer. And I want to say that to people, that that's how this works. We set things in motion when we ask for things. And I had actually asked for that help. And I got humbled because prior to that moment, all I had was a little bit of land and done a little bit of work, but I asked for that ancestral help to have more land and do that work. And I saw this whole year as a trajectory got from baby steps to quantum leaps put into that situation with Unity, with Youth Works, with Mother Nature Center, and then with Three Sisters Collective, and so many people in the community digging holes in a place that was a rock quarry, and actually a place that had not, that was a dump for some people. And we managed to bring in beautiful soil, refertilize that place, and also a water tank, because there's no water there. So we're literally in the worst possible case scenario, creating this beautiful farm and providing all kinds of different places where our community can see themselves. So the last thing I'll say about that, because yeah, we have pallet beds, so people know how to use like the most simplest recycled material to make garden beds. We have drip irrigation and solar panel set up so people can see what it looks like when you really want to optimize on the use of your resources and something sustainable. And we have regenerative practices that are tied to the indigenous communities of Oga Po'ogeh and original peoples farming on that land, praying on that land. And we just had a big community event where we got to see everybody see themselves in that. And originally they wanted to call it something else, but I really pressed on it being something really simple in English, Full Circle Farm. And I watched people at the opening start to translate that for themselves, what it meant to be a full circle, healing, Black and brown, white, red, yellow nations, old and young, to do the whole thing around and to really try to propagate, in my mind and being, the space to give people land back, to give people their practices, whatever it is. And remembering you, Sipp again, because it's like something that you had said, somebody else said, and that I've just been emphasizing the last couple of weeks, is that healing on our terms. That was already there, but it's important to have the terminologies. And that was that's super important. And I'll pass it over to Carlton. Muchas gracias.
Thank you all for your work. My name is Carlton Turner. I am a caramel complexion, brown skinned Black man with a salmon, or my son says it's a salmon colored sweater. I think it's just like pinkish red, and with a mint green walls behind me. I am sitting in my media lab at my offices in Utica, Mississippi. I am part of 8 generations of agrarians who, my family, that have been on this land in Mississippi, which is the indigenous home of the Yazoo, the Natchez, and the Choctaw. And I'm just really blessed to be here. I live in a community. As I said, my family's been here for 8 generations, and all of those generations have been part of developing deep and sophisticated and complicated relationships with the land. My mother farmed, started farming when she was 5 years old. her parents farmed, her grandparents farmed, her great-grandparents farmed, and her great-great-grandparents farmed on this land. And I have been working in arts and culture probably for the last 25 years as a poet, as a musician, performer, a theater artist, writer, and media maker, and you know, never lost. I guess I never lost the ability to access the land-based practices that my ancestors were deeply engaged in on this land. In 2017, my wife and I co-founded the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production in a community of Utica, Mississippi, where in this particular community, when I grew up some 30 some odd years ago, the community produced about 85 to 90% of its own food. They grew everything locally. Everything was pretty much organic. All of its produce, vegetables, fruits, peaches, blueberries, the vegetables, the meats, whether it was, you know, chicken or turkey or pork or lamb, everything came from the farm. Milk and butter, everything. I mean everything. And you fast forward in the same community 20 years, and it lost its last grocery store in 2014. And it's what some people refer to as a food desert, but I don't like to refer to it as a food desert, because a desert is an actual fully functional ecosystem that has everything that it needs to exist. And what we're dealing with here in this community is what I consider to be food apartheid. It's where, depending on your geography, your zip code, your socioeconomic status, your educational status, you may have access to fresh, healthy, organic food. And if you are on the other end of the spectrum, you may only have access to food that is completely unhealthy, nutrient deficient, and causing severe health and wellness issues in our community. So we started the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production as a both food and story space to help remind our community and reawaken the memory of what we already know is possible. We've already been in situations in which we've controlled our own food systems. We've been in situations where we worked and had relationship with the land to produce everything that we needed to survive and to thrive. And so our work is not about innovation. We think about innovation as an act of remembrance. Remember what our ancestors have already created, all the problems that our ancestors have already solved, and remembering those solutions, reawakening that part of our bone marrow to manifest those solutions back into today, and start a generational cycle of healing, of putting health and wellness at the center of our being, at the center of the way that we think about our relationship to the land, to others, to everyone, to the systems that govern our lives. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. I look forward to going and visiting my sister and brothers over there in the Southwest, and learning from their traditions and understanding how we can build greater alliances, strategic relationships, and begin to repair the culture that has always existed in this land.
Thank you so much, each of you. As I hear you speak, I'm just like really grounded in this through line and this really deep framework that you all base your labor and your activism and your practice on, right? It's hard to even assign those titles to what you're doing, because it is just so deep and so organic, right? And acknowledging how deep this labor is, I want to hear a little bit about how COVID has impacted your communities and your practice, and how you've seen and experienced the role of artists or culture makers in your regions really be responsive this past year and a half. I'm really interested to hear about that.
Do you want anybody? Do you want me to go?
Whoever feels led, yeah.
Okay, I would like to talk about it because, as mentioned, the impacts of COVID have been pretty devastating for Indigenous people. I am more considered an urban native. I live in Santa Fe, even though again, it is Indigenous territory, it's all Indigenous territory. But I didn't grow up on my Pueblo or reservation. In the larger America, they call them reservations, but here we actually have a special designation distinction as Pueblo people. We have land bases, but they're not considered reservations. So just to clarify that. We have not, those of us who do not live in our Pueblos have not been able to be in and with our Pueblo communities for over a year now. There's literally fortified entrances in our communities to monitor who comes in and out in an effort to stave the virus, which unfortunately has managed to permeate those barriers and have effects on most of our communities here in New Mexico. There's 19 Pueblos, we have the Navajo Nation, we have the Apache Nations, and I would say that we've all been impacted directly or indirectly just with our own family and kinship networks. So that has made it very hard for us to engage in our spiritual practices, which are very much a part of our lives, and the cycles of our ceremonies are in line with farming. So now is the time our communities are actually doing dances, and I failed to do the visual explanation of my background, but there is a painting behind me I am a brown Indigenous woman, middle-aged, and I have a painting behind me of one of our Pueblos and my daughter wearing traditional regalia, and she is standing in front of one of our multi-level tribal structures that kind of like Taos Pueblo, if any of you have been there, and there's flowers in front of her. This is one of my favorite art pieces. So yes, COVID has impacted our ways of life. And again, that's another kind of layer of trauma over the existing effects of colonialism. And how COVID was handled in this country leaves a lot to be desired, and the most vulnerable people are the most impacted. And so with that said, it's really shifted our work into high gear, because it was because of all of this and not being able to engage in our practices on our tribal lands that Three Sisters started a garden in a small plot last year, and really just kind of saying, wow, we're all stuck here in Santa Fe, in the city. We can't go back and forth to our tribal communities and spend time with our people. And so we're going to have to kind of recreate what's going on there here in our own backyards, so to speak. And so it's actually shifted our focus to really like investing our spiritual work and work in our own backyards, for lack of a better term. And then we were lucky to partner with Alas, and now we have this even bigger farm to care for. And so I would even say, a lot of us, we do as Indigenous activists and social justice workers, we also do a lot of frontline activism, where we're really like holding it down on the front lines, calling for the removal of racist monuments, for example. And that's really, those works take a toll on you, on you. The psychological and literal effects of COVID take a psychological toll on us and our communities. And so farming has been really healing and transformative. And I think we've all, members of the collective, we all, have farmed in one way or another, or been around the farmers in our community, but to actually take the onus on ourselves to really create our own farming and to maintain our own gardens is kind of a real big jump. And I don't know that it would have happened that fast had it not been for COVID. And then laying and praying those intentions that Israel mentioned, because it is prayerful and soulful work to engage with the land in that way. It's a reciprocal relationship. And planting those seeds last year, everything has moved really quickly. And yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing to see this heart work grow and how it impacts people. Like Israel said, we just had this celebratory ceremonial event for our farm on Saturday, and to see the cross section of people who came to literally put their hands in the soil and connect with the land and do it with an Indigenous led framework and really honoring place in that way. And understanding that you are a visitor on Indigenous land in Oga Po'ogeh. Santa Fe is just a new name to a place that's been here forever, with people farming and cultivating and praying on this land to reclaim that practice, and for and people to bear witness to that and engage and grow together in community. That's really powerful work, and I'm really proud of it. That's land back. It's not just a hashtag on social media, y'all.
I'll go real briefly because I feel really, again, I have to keep saying I feel really blessed to be in this space with Carlton, because, you know, and it just makes me think about all the people that have done the work for years and years to be an example. And for whatever it is, I'm really feeling that right now, Carlton, like every step you took, every roadblock in front of you that you took to be in the place you're standing, that is the place we're trying to get to. But also feeling like, wow, I'm actually standing there too, you know, because we put a lot of prayers together for a long time, and we all knew, and when I say we, I'm talking about people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, knew that one kind of reckoning or another was coming. And we also understood, because of 500 years of colonization, that we have always been there resilient, but there have always been forces to try to knock us down. And to bear witness to the reckoning that was COVID, and to then just bear witness to how big the disparities were, to watch our communities be without resources, our communities be in the same old that we already knew, pre-Trump, pre-other realities, but then to just watch it play out how we knew it was going to play out, dishearteningly, around who was going to get resources and who wasn't. Even with this space, when PPE money came in, we were not able to access any of that. And we watched richer white organizations take 25,000, take 50,000, while all we needed was like 5,000 to stay afloat. And instead of like getting heartbroken and feeling like the world was on top of us, we went out and we helped our community. When we watched a bunch of folks, because of Zoom, because of COVID, get on Zoom and then sit back and start doing the work from home, we went out on the streets and tried to do what we could to help our people. And we know a lot of people did that. And we're grateful for everybody who stepped out that way. Because while I say that the dark side showed up, the real beautiful light side showed up. We saw people come to our space. John Paul Granillo, who before that was just an artist, we saw him take on food distribution, and we were distributing 1,000 food bags a week. Out of this little old space over here, we were just giving out food bags. And again, you're like, why is the art organization giving out food bags? Because we're on the south side of town, and sadly, who was looking out for us? Our own people, right? While we're doing that, Three Sisters was doing all this other work to help out, and we watched other orgs step up, and we saw with our own clear eyes, mutual aid, who's gonna do that work, and who's gonna sit back and type away, you know, just to be honest, you know. And that was just the reality, that who was gonna put themselves in that situation? COVID hit, and we had to be there, right? And again, the light side of it, the county, we just went up to them, and because they saw that it was beyond their own control, and their own possibilities with all the bureaucracies in front of them, they gave us a piece of land for $1. And we were on that land in a week versus, what it would have taken the previous year or even the previous month before COVID. So we want to acknowledge the folks that stepped up and want to acknowledge the folks that didn't. It's all good. It's all good because this is a time that we have to really be in alignment with ourselves. So we watch that and we watch who's going to align with what. And we're going to continue to see that because we've seen that with Amazon and all these corporations that have gotten really rich really fast. Well, we have gotten really strong really fast because of our ancestors.
We've always been strong.
Right. And so that's the beauty, and that's where I'm going to pass it over to you, Carlton, because that's the beauty of what you've been holding. And we're like, oh, we're there with you now.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to say, but I'm going to try to keep it brief as well. I live in a state where, we have a hostile government. Our state government is hostile. Since the Affordable Care Act came down the pike, they have consistently decided that they would not expand Medicare, even though the government was paying basically 90% of the tag, which would actually expand care for about 100 and some odd thousand Black people and poor people in the state of Mississippi healthcare. We have the highest rates of diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, infant mortality, all of these health issues. And we have some of the most fertile land in the world. The Mississippi Delta is rich and fertile and expansive, and it produces nothing of, very little food that is to be consumed by people. It's mostly all the commodities, the soybeans, the corn, all the things that, end up going into fast food, junk food, and commodity products. Even now, as the federal government is saying that we will pick up the tab for Medicare, the whole tab, they're like, no, we won't expand it. And that is a level of cruelty, that we have experienced as people of color, as Indigenous communities here, as Black people in this state for a long time. The history is long and ripe with it. So I just wanted to preface by saying that, and part of our work is that we have to be proactive in defining and creating the structures that make sense for our community, because no one is coming to save us. I'll say that again. No one is coming to save us. We are in this with our community, with the people that we love, the people that we see every day. Those are the people that we have to throw down with. In terms of artists, I work in an organizational collaboration with a group called the Intercultural Leadership Institute. And you can find that at weareili.org, weareili.org. And that is a collaboration that consists of 5 organizations: Sipp Culture, Alternate Roots, which is a member service-based organization in the Southeast that serves artists in 14 Southern states working at the intersection of arts and activism. The National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, which is a national service organization for Latino arts organizations. First Peoples Fund, which is a fund that is based in South Dakota, but serves Indigenous communities across the country, in Alaska and in Hawaii. And then the Pai'i Foundation, which serves Native Hawaiians. And we worked together when COVID hit to basically raise about $6 million that we then helped to distribute to artists across the region to make sure that they had support in these times in which this community that has basically been gig workers for as long as the gig economy was started on the backs of artists. As Dr. Castro was saying, their ceremonies, their dances, their prayers, they're all linked to the seasons and the harvest and the planting and all of those things. There is no culture without agriculture. Agriculture gives us the songs and the dances and the musics and the poems and the poetry and all of these, the beautiful works of art comes from sitting and cultivating a space that then gives back to us. And so we were able to make those dollars available. And what's important, I think, about that practice is that our work is about expanding the definition of who is considered artists. This is not just about performers or people who are in galleries, but this is about understanding that the Miss Johnson down the street that makes quilt, she's an artist. Also, Mr. Thompson up the road that plays for the church choir. He plays piano. That's the only place he plays. He's an artist. It's all of these people that are part of the culture bearer community that never get recognized as art. And part of our work and our challenge is to recenter our cultural practice around culture bearers, not around the entertainment industry, but around those that are holding the traditions that keep us grounded, keep us in relationship, and keep our values front and center in the way that we work together as communities.
Thank you so much, each of you. Carlton, there is no culture without agriculture. I'm just trying to scribble down notes and you stopped talking sooner than I could write them. Thank you so much for grounding us in that. And a large part of this symposium is trying to shift the way we consume the notion of artists and culture bearers and culture makers exactly through that lens. And it's not a long gap to get people there. So thank you for so clearly drawing that link. My friends, Christina, I heard you talk about land back, and we're working through the land, and we are getting back to the land in the labor that you are all engaging in, these restorative and regenerative practices. Oftentimes we hear about land back from Indigenous folks oftentimes we hear about reparations, including land for descendants of enslaved people. And oftentimes I feel like the media places these calls in conflict, when in reality, we know that these practices are in a spirit of mutuality and are supportive of one another. I'd love to hear about this from you all. I think the audience would as well, to learn. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a lot to say, but there's a trend, or these hashtags that go around Indigenous country, land back, a lot of time, I don't know, sometimes it seems performative when you put stuff like this on social media, because a lot of people want to get on these social media or BLM bandwagons or land back and share these things. But really, what are the practices that people are engaging in every day to acknowledge the fact that they are on unceded lands, benefiting off of unceded lands? Here in New Mexico, we have a huge issue with gentrification, right? And this has all been exacerbated too with COVID, because people who are, of a certain economic strata are able to work from home, and have been able to work from home, which provides them a certain amount of leverage. And you've seen a lot of influx of people moving into New Mexico because, rent is probably cheaper than some big cities. It's a beautiful place. There's lots of scenic things here. Again, that culture that people gravitate to, maybe because they don't have their own culture. And so it's the effects of the ongoing effects that we're seeing on land acquisition, gentrification pushing people out who can't even afford to live in Santa Fe anymore, the erasure of our culture in the process as the aesthetic changes to become more modernized, and the warehouse districts that are now popping up here too, along with the new art settler population that continues to come, that started in the early 1900s with the likes of Georgia O'Keeffe, like I said. So, we are always, as Indigenous people, feeling the push off of our homelands. And so I think the trend in the future for our folks who want to be in allyship or want to give back in some capacity, that's, that's something that that people need to reckon with, their privilege. And so, I would ask people who want to be in allyship, it's like, how are you really wielding your privilege? How are you creating space for Indigenous people, Indigenous centering? How are you actively giving up, whether it's a nonprofit industrial complex organization? How are you centering Indigenous people? Who are your leaders in your organization that claims to be benevolent and for the people? Like, how is it really in practice? Sometimes, there's just so many ways to get engaged, I guess, with the new movement. And really, this country needs to reckon with the theft of our Indigenous lands if we're ever going to move forward. So I don't know. I don't think it should be the onus should be on Indigenous people how non-Indigenous people are going to make right with their ancestral historical legacy. But until they come to terms with what has been done to Indigenous people and Black folks, and begin to funnel resources in our direction and give up some of that privilege, it really has to start there, I believe. And I wish I had better answers, but we're busy at this point doing the work to preserve our own people and community and culture. But that reckoning needs to happen. And I think it is happening. And hopefully the seeds that we're planting in our community and providing examples of how people can engage in the community, that's what we can do. I think we can provide the space, but are people ready to step into that space and decenter themselves and their own privilege?
Yeah, I think that is the key. It's not just about, it's, as you were talking about the hashtags and Black Lives Matter and Land Back and these things that become really popular culture. They become, the cool thing to wear, the cool thing to talk about and say, puts you in the in crowd. Yeah, and, what we have to also recognize is that there's real work that has to take place. It's not just about saying, I'm on Choctaw land, I'm on, the land acknowledgement is wonderful. But what we have to also recognize is that if we're not turning to these communities for leadership, then we're missing the point of the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement acknowledges that there's societies that existed, or civilizations that existed, and that there was a worldview that persisted that was very different than the worldview that exists today, which is about profit over people, which is about individualism. This ancient way of life and thinking about the world was about community. It was about being in relationship and respecting the land that you live on as a spiritual entity that you had to engage with in order to survive and in order to live and grow and prosper. And that what we have is a challenge in the way that we're thinking about the world and how that impacts the quality of life that we all get a chance to have. And so we think about these like generational issues of climate change, of in Mississippi, we're seeing storm after storm after storm after storm. We had the most active hurricane season last year than I can remember, 17 named storms. And they said that this year is going to be, the same. And it all comes down to the type of society that we've created that has no respect for that relationship with the entity that we're a part of. And so that requires leadership that is putting into practice different types of ways of living that are different from the way that we're living right now, which is not sustainable. And until we get to having these conversations in real form, not just in lip service, because most of the decisions that are being made at the highest level of federal government, at business, are about maintaining wealth and power and control. They're not about having a right relationship and creating opportunities for everyone to thrive. And so when we talk about indigeneity, we talk about the descendants of enslaved Africans, we talk about those voices, the native and indigenous voices. It's not just about give us something. It's about just move out the way so that we can do it the way that it needs to be done.
Just move out the way so we can get it done. That, one, beyond the hashtag, land back. So those that have access to land, please give it back to the indigenous people what you're willing to give back. It's just that we don't have time to go back and forth around this or create policies around this. Just if you have access to land or know somebody that has access to land, give it back to the indigenous people so that we can caretake it, because we've been in a off balance for a long time. And the what Black folks, what indigenous folks, what original peoples all throughout the globe understand is that we have to be in reciprocity with the land. And the more that we are stuck with this capitalism and other mentalities that we can just keep bulldozing the land and not being in reciprocity with it, we already know where we're heading in that trajectory. And that we actually have the power and the ability to slow it down, to bring it back to where it's supposed to be when we engage in indigenous practices throughout the world. That's the power we have, the power we were given by Creator. And that we have that if we begin to do that work and we give people back the land. And because the US has so many debts, one to the indigenous people, two to the Black folks that it enslaved here, three to every other person that it enslaved and made us work the land, that these are the lines of trajectory that have to be given back access to land. And first, give back access to land because it's our liberation is in the access to land. And two, to the indigenous, to anybody, BIPOC or anybody else, like Carlton was saying, they ain't gonna save us. So while I'm saying give indigenous land back and all this, also tell everybody else, we have to get the land ourselves. We have to buy it back. We have to access it. We have to own it in this capitalist world, because we don't own crap, but we have to go out and get it. So those are the two really big realities that we are stuck with in order to be actually get to our liberation. It's being autonomous. And as long as we're in relationship to other entities, you don't have autonomy and you don't have your true vision and your true understanding and your true ancestors behind you, because you're going to be in a compromise. So that's my little hashtag.
Thank you so much. Something I'm also hearing in our work together, Christina and Israel, is the interrelated relationship between violence on the planet and violence on people in New Mexico. I think of that. I think of Los Alamos. I think of nuclear storage. I think of extractive industries. Carlton in Mississippi, you were speaking to what that looks like for the food culture and food climate, and really shifted our thinking from what we've been fed as food deserts, and knowing that deserts are in perfect balance actually, but rather the lack of access to food as being an incredibly violent act, right? And intentional. And then you were reflecting on the crops that are grown on this very fertile delta are not fed to the people as is, right? You make chips, corporations make chips out of them, cereal, just the harmful food. So if I could hear a little bit more about this link between violence on the planet and the people from the communities you are from and what you've seen and how it impacts your work. And then we'll go into audience Q&A as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that. In Indigenous social justice circles and environmental work, we have a saying that what happens to the land happens to the people. And so this ties directly into the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives movement. That is an epidemic all throughout the Americas, starting with 500 years ago, which we're actually at a 500-year cycle of when Spanish colonialism first hit our lands in the islands of like Puerto Rico and that area moving west. And so what you see is a culture of violence dominating our communities for 500 years now. And with that comes toxic patriarchy. And with that comes the hierarchy of race and white supremacy. And that's been played out. And so when you think of like missing and murdered Indigenous people, specifically women, children, LGBTQ relatives, it's really tied in with the desecration and the disrespect of the earth that we've been talking about. So unfortunately, with these ideas of manifest destiny, we have ideas of like terra nullius, which is an Italian, an European Italian word for like land that is perceived to be underutilized or not used in a specific way that is deemed worthy to the white supremacist, toxic patriarchy, colonialist, imperialist culture. And so with that, when they came to our lands and saw or couldn't see the way we managed our lands, it looked like an open season. And with ideas of manifest destiny, which designate, a certain European culture as the superior race ordained by God to colonize other places that are underutilized, including people. This ideology permeates. That's the fabric of America. And so when you see land degradation, it's a natural byproduct of this culture, of the culture of violence. And so here in New Mexico, you have the extractive industries, gas and oil. You have transient employees, predominantly men who come into our communities. Wherever you see pipelines being laid, you see also those transient employees. So that's up in the tar sands of Canada to Standing Rock, where you see corporations, maquiladoras on the border, and those factories that pump out clothing and necessities for first world countries. You're going to see the land being sabotaged or sacrificed for those industries, and then you see the women and the effects on women and children, whether it's sex trafficking, whether it's preventing women from organizing on the border in those factories by disappearing them daily as they're getting off of their buses after work, whether you see, also like here in New Mexico, we have, as you mentioned, Los Alamos, and that's where they developed the atomic bomb. And then tested it down in southern New Mexico, which literally irradiated our whole state. And you also see the actual byproducts of the runoffs of toxic chemicals in our land, in our traditional land bases up here in northern New Mexico. And there was little regulations back in the day when they were building these weapons of mass destruction that they're now using, over Palestine. Those effects in our backyards are real, in our waterways, in our land bases. They're actually releasing a toxic chemical right now into the air just above us at Los Alamos. It's called tritium. And it's a toxic gas that they really have to, they can't hold on to it forever. So they're slowly releasing it into our indigenous and northern New Mexican populations. So, it's ongoing. Disrespect of the land is ongoing. It's something we have to live with, and it's a harsh reality. But these things are happening, and we're exposing them, and we can't keep these things a secret. And if this is the way the United States is choosing to engage with itself and the rest of the world, there are spiritual and repercussions for everybody, not just indigenous people. Nobody's immune at this point. So yeah, we know this story. Black and indigenous people know this story. But again, it's time for the larger culture to reckon with this history and begin to make it right. We can't do all the work.
I have nothing to add.
Mic drop.
Done.
Can I just say one little thing to remind all of us that we all have a responsibility given to us by Creator to take care of the seeds, to take care of our Mother Earth, to take care of our water. It doesn't fall on any one people. This is our ancestral legacy. All of our ancestral legacy, and beyond surviving, thriving, that we go back and connect to that. That's where what we're all needing to do some way, somehow, whether it's in your backyard and just having a real relationship to water, whether it's doing some volunteer work at a farm or giving land back, that your great grandparents were connected to the seed, and we all got disconnected and reconnected and need to be more connected. So that's just a reminder that we're giving everybody, because in this globalization reality, we might feel like we don't have any power, and we have all the power in the world because our ancestors are behind us. And we are the water protectors, we are the earth protectors, we are the ones here to make sure she's okay, but also know she's gonna be okay. We're the ones that need to reckon with ourselves. She was here before the dinosaurs, she's gonna be here after us. So don't worry about your relationship to her in your community, in the world. That's what you need to worry about, and feel the power and beauty of just one seed and how it ripples out into the universe.
Just want to thank you all deeply for reflecting on those questions with one another. And if you want to continue to reflect as we move on, I'm going to just open the Q&A and read some questions from the audience as well. Audience, my friends, thank you so much for the dialogue in the chat. I've only been able to partially pay attention to it. So if you do have questions that you drop there, please also drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them as well. And Dr. Castro, Israel, Carlton, my first question for you is, what advice do you have for younger artists and food growers for how to survive under capitalism? How do you each make a living, and what opportunities do you see for young people in ways that align with your values and community? Sorry, I didn't see that line.
I would say, and this is not just for young people, but any person who is trying to resist this worldview that everyone is currently operating under. We named our organization the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, and the reason why we insisted on that name was because we wanted to, one, recognize that we have to help our community remember that they are cultural producers first before they're consumers. And right now, our community has lost its identity as producers. It still produces, but it doesn't look at itself as the primary producer of the things that it needs. So we wanted to begin to shift our community's identity and the way that it thinks about itself from being consumer first to being producer first. The second part of that is that we recognize that the culture, and when I talk about culture, I'm talking about the place where people meet life. And it consumes, culture is everything around us. It's the way that we talk, it's the way that we walk, it's the way that we learn, it's the way that we sing and dance and have joy and that we weep and mourn. It's the way that we celebrate everything. That's culture. And we recognize that the culture that we are a part of is broken, and that it doesn't reflect the values that we hold. It doesn't manifest the things that we say that we care about. And so we wanted to be cultural producers because we see a need to produce the culture that we want to be a part of. And so that's not coming necessarily from any indigenous or ancient practice, but it's realizing that there's a culture that we're all a part of, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And that it's our duty to begin to shift the culture to deeper reflect the values that we hold most dear. And so we talk about values, like what are the things that you care about? What are the things that mean the most to you? How does that show up in the way that you treat your neighbor? How does it show up in the way that you show up at work? How does it show up in the way that you learn, the way that you're teaching, the way that you treat your body, the way that you treat your family? Those are the ways in which we can shift the culture. And so capitalism is a culture. And it's a culture that if it's not working, you have to reject it and move on to something that does work for your community. The question is, what is that thing and how do you uplift that and center that in your practice?
One of our speakers yesterday, Carlton, Patty Byrne from Scenes Invalides, said it's easier for some of us to imagine a dystopian future than it is to imagine a liberated future. And she was reflecting on how our radical imagination has really been stunted. And I feel like that's really the way people approach capitalism and, thinking that like green consumption, right? A Tesla is going to save us and the planet, as opposed to it harming Indigenous communities in South America and being extremely extractive in its own way, right? Completely shifting as opposed to trying to recreate the same equations again is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's a psychological tool that they use to make us feel that we don't have power, that things are not it's all a lost cause. That's not Indigenous futurisms. I think that's a psychological mind tactic that the dominant culture puts on us. So we have to be really careful with how we talk to ourselves and treat ourselves. And so I think we can't afford pessimism.
Whose stories are we consuming?
Yeah. Can you repeat that, Carlton?
Yeah, the question is, whose stories are we consuming?
Yes.
Are they our stories? Are they the stories that we need to tell ourselves? Or are they someone else's vision of what we need to be? And what part are we playing in the stories that are being told?
So I would say in the culture of, like you said, consumerism and capitalism, we cannot afford pessimism. Yes. Somebody just put that in the chat box. Yeah. And that ties into notions of radical self-care, radical joy, radical love in our communities. That is the anti-venom to the culture of violence's narrative, that all is lost and all is unsalvageable, and that we're all doomed for destruction. That's the death cult of the culture of violence talking to us. We have to reject that every day. And that's where your ceremonies and your spiritual practices come in, because this is spiritual warfare that they're doing. It's not just biological, it's not COVID, it's not environmental racism. It is all those things, but it's not just that. It's an attack on our minds and our spirits so that we can't do the work, and so that we feel stunted, and so we can't progress. And so, yeah, we have to find ways every day to reclaim radical joy and love and care and community care as an act of resistance, as an antidote to the culture of violence, because they want us to be defeated, and we cannot afford that. We cannot afford that. The Indigenous futurisms demands that we love ourselves and we love each other, and we practice radical joy and self-care, whether it's just taking a nap or not, hustling all damn day till you're depleted and you forget to eat. These are the things that we have to start reprogramming ourselves and our communities to love again, and to teach each other radical love and joy and celebration and community care. That's what's up. They can't win. We can't let them win. We're right. We're so close, y'all. This is like, we're shifting everything. We're doing it. So like, we're literally doing it. So stay the course. This is not the time to feel defeated or give up, man. This is like look at these systems, they're crumbling all around us. America is crumbling. This is the time to recreate something better than they could ever imagine, because the dominant Western culture is never going to recognize our Indigenous and Black excellence. They will usurp it and extract it for all it's worth, but it will never truly see us as human. So that being said, we have to create our own systems and plant our own new seeds of hope and love.
So on that note, and what, because we're all just saying the same thing, and we want to be what ancestral truth and contemporary truth we have to offer you. And La Quech is what my Nawa ancestors said, is eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. So by your bearing witness is just your mirror, and we're nobody. We're not anybody special. I had an elder say a while back, he said, call your studio creator. And I felt like super like creator. And he said, yeah, because when you create, and what Carlton was talking about, when we're creating culture, when we're creating anything, we're in the universal truth of what we came here to do, and we're not consumer. We're in our truest power, whether it's storytelling, whether it's planting seeds, whether it's making art, we're in our truest power to creation. And on the other level of like, you know, that when we decolonize and we bring back our ancestral truth, we enter another quantum field, because that is our ancestral truth, is to enter another quantum field where our ancestors said our dreams are our truth, and what you vision and what you feel is real becomes real. And the parts to make it linearly happen on this plane are kind of irrelevant, but that you have to grasp onto the dream and the truth. Whether we name it Alas de Agua, Three Sisters Collective, or Sipp culture, or anything else, we're naming our dream. So name your dream, and everything else, start funneling your vision and your truth towards that, and you're gonna get there. But you can't have a shadow of a doubt, because that's what's gonna come and test you. And on the very practical side, because somebody asked about practical sides, because that was what we try to do at Alas de Agua too, which means wings of water, because we're trying to give you water and we're trying to give you wings to fly. Show up once a week, 2 hours, show up, and it's gonna start happening. Show up for the people and show up for yourself. This started with showing up every Wednesday, 4 to 7, every Wednesday. No matter I had 1 person, 20 people, just keep showing up, keep showing up. And then you start bearing witness to what's the reality around you. How do I create a different reality, right? We started doing economic, earth economy pop-ups, where you could buy stuff from us or you could trade with us, going back to our ancestral truth. And we start creating other little things. Oh, we want to tell our stories, then we do monologues. But we show up, and you keep showing up, and you become the pillar. And it feels heavy at first, but then when you recognize that all I got to do is show up, and everything else is going to manifest, but somebody has to show up. So ask yourself, am I going to be the person that shows up? And know that there's just so much of that quantum field. And I'm not talking to you in science, but it's our ancestors are in that quantum field. They're going to come and help you, but you have to be visionary. You have to be the one posing that bigger truth and that bigger mirror and that relentless hope.
Thank you, friends. So sorry, I'm like scrolling through the chat to see what to reflect on next. And I think we're going to land on this one. I feel like you've addressed it a bit, but expanding a bit more on how do we move from gaining power under the constraints of neoliberal capitalism to resistance practices that are more transformative?
Well, speaking on behalf of myself first, but also thinking about the work that the other 2 organizations represent, the most revolutionary act is to plant a seed. Because the moment you plant something, the moment you plant a seed, you didn't do it for yourself. Because there's you may not even see what happens with that thing, but you're acting on behalf of the future. And I think what we think about, and so much of it is connected to the way that we consume, which is instantaneously. You don't have to go to the movies. You don't have to, get dressed up, get in your car, drive, buy a ticket, get your popcorn, go sit in a chair to watch the movies anymore. You just pop on HBO Max, and there it is, the biggest releases right there. Everything is instantaneous. You don't have to wait for anything. But transformational change takes time. It takes a level of patience and consistency that we have not been prepared for generationally. And it's exactly what Brother Israel was just talking about. Show up. Don't worry about like the bigger things and how that thing is going to happen. Like, focus on today. Do a revolutionary act today. Do it again tomorrow if you're blessed to see tomorrow, and keep doing it every day. Do the work that you can do that is at your hands and your fingertips. Talk to other people, strategize, think long-term, think globally, act locally, and act in the moment. Be present. We get caught up in this idea that we can control what's going to be the next thing. We can't. All we can do is prepare for it. We can't control it. We don't know what it's going to be. The next generation may decide that they don't want it to look anything like what our values have shaped us to think that we want. So we can't get tied on to this. We can't get locked onto this idea of what this future that we're creating is going to be for us. It has to be, what are we helping to create for that next iteration? Because we may never even see it. And most of us have a real challenge with not seeing the change that we want to see in the world, like not living long enough to actually see that. But I'm doing the work for my children, and I'm thinking about my children's children, and I want their lives to be radically differently than it is today. And so what does that mean I need to do? And what seeds do I need to plant here on the ground and the land? What seeds do I need to plant with my children and my spouse and my partner and my family and my community? And then how they grow. Some of them are going to grow, some of them are going to die, some of them are going to grow out of control, but we can plant the seeds and we can do our best to tend to them and make sure that they have what they need to grow. And I know that's a corny metaphor, but we are talking about farmers here. So.
Someone said it last week at another conference. They said, what did our ancestors do when they didn't get the funding? And our ancestors didn't need funding to be the culture bearers, the culture creators, and seeding the future. But because we are blessed with the abundance of seeds, literal seeds, and spiritual seeds and metaphorical seeds, but we need to literally plant those seeds. We're asking all you, because that's going to change you on the inside. When you stop going like all capitalism and look at kale, how much kale costs. And when you try to grow yourself some kale, you're going to have a whole different relationship to what you thought that was, and to what you thought corn was, and whatever ancestral connections you have to seed. But it's super important that you literally seed on the earth to get to what we're talking about.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe one last question, and I'm just going to read it from the Q&A. It's, in your communities, what are examples of how you see art making form an integral part of the reclamation of the right relationship to the land and preservation of culture?
Can you repeat it one more time, please?
In your communities, what are specific examples of how you see art making form an integral part of the reclamation and right relationship to the land and preservation of culture?
Okay, I'll take that one. I'll at least start. But part of what we've been doing as an effort to reclaim Oga Po'ogeh, or the the original place name and understandings that come with it. Here in Santa Fe is we've been doing, we've done already a couple murals that highlight the name even of Oga Po'ogeh. So whereas we're talking about land back or recentering indigeneity in this place that has been so heavily colonized, it's reintroducing the place name of Oga Po'ogeh and what that means. And so Oga Po'ogeh is Tewa, and it means white shell water place. And we have a big river that runs through our city. And so really reintroducing the name Oga Po'ogeh. We've done 2 murals, one's at the farm and one's on a very prominent street in our town. And that's the beginning, that's a visual land acknowledgement. Thousands of people are seeing these murals acknowledging place. And again, it's like planting the seed. Okay, what is Oga Po'ogeh? That's interesting. Oh, wow. Some people don't even understand, you know, they come here or to come to work or to make art, or they come to be at, you know, to be a part of the art scene here, but they don't understand that there's really strong indigenous roots here. And so I think creating murals that that speak to the original peoples of place is a part of our work. In the next couple of years, we're doing a series of murals at the farm to highlight agrarian practices that are so fundamental to the culture here in northern New Mexico. So we're planning on doing a whole series at the farm as well as throughout the city. And our next one is on the river trail. There's a big bike trail too along our river. We're going to do some more indigenous centered murals that highlight the original practices of place. So I think each mural that we do is like planting a garden and planting these seeds of even just shifting the cultural understanding of this place, because that's where it starts. People need to understand that we're all, they're visitors, which is so antithetical to Western the Western expansion mindset of, you know, people can go wherever they want to go, zoom boom, I don't have to go to a real job anymore. I can take my work through my computer and I'm just going to go to Santa Fe now, or I'm going to go to Dallas, New Mexico, and I'm going to set up shop. And, you know, I'm going to, you know, rent a place that, you know, pretty much, you know, is outpricing any local person's ability to live here. So I think once you start to integrate these ideas, I think that's where the art component comes in and the artivism. We do work that's, you know, our work is rooted in art activism. So even reclaiming a place name can have a really powerful impact on the way people see where they are visiting. And maybe engage with them in a new way that can invite them into a reciprocal relationship with the land they're occupying.
Thank you so much, Christina. I really want to reiterate to folks in the audience that everyone we have speaking today are just like incredible, like artists and this work, the agrarian practices, the creative practices are part of that. But I just like look at their backgrounds right now, just like linking all the traditional forms and the really traditional forms and practices, and just wanting to thank you all deeply for being on today's panel and being in conversation with one another. Just looking at the chat, I know that folks are deeply inspired, and I encourage folks to learn more about these incredible organizations and the people doing this work as you engage in your own day-to-day practices, right? I also want to share that this is not our last event of today. At 3 p.m., we'll also be welcoming Police Free Pen and Fossil Free Pen, who will be leading a workshop titled Climate in the Carceral State, Imagining an Abolitionist Future. And it's an event in which you'll actually be creating together, whether it's poetry or bring your own collaging materials, or even if it's just a pen and paper and you want to draw with them. It'll be an interactive space. And we really wanted to parse out some of the heavy conversations of the symposium with opportunities to flex your mind and creative muscles as well. So please join us there. I understand that some folks had a hard time entering this event, and in the spirit of equalizing that experience, this is the link for for the next workshop. And if you experience similar issues for the remainder of the events for the week, I just want to share that Eventbrite should be sending you a link, an email with all the links of that particular day and the morning of the day. There is also a portal and a password protected portal that has all the events. And I wonder if tech would be able to just quickly drop that in for folks who are attending here. But other than that, just big ups, big thanks. Thank you all. Thank you all. And if there's anything you'd like to say to the audience, I welcome you to do so.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be a part of this. Thank you.
And I'm speaking for us. We're all available to talk about land, how to get land, and the different realities of how that can happen. And I said we again, but I'll say for myself, I'm available to talk to anybody that wants to look at different approaches to get land, or to farming, or art questions, whatever kind of questions people have, that just email me. Was that offered in the, anyways, so that's all I gotta say. Thank you so much to everybody here for all your beautiful work and all your inspiration.
Thank you for having us. That was awesome.
Thank you so much. We so appreciate you. Have a great day. Take good care, folks.